I don't really have a clever opening joke for this one. Something something spoiler alert, something something this video might get you angry, something something shameless self-promotion. After over half a decade of speculation, we finally got to see the Knight last year. The only concrete overarching antagonist we have so far, and our main one until we get to meet the cat owner outside a Zelda knockoff. The Knight immediately draws intrigue for their work behind the scenes, their connection to Kris, and their odd behavioral traits. The game occasionally prods you to wonder who the Knight really is. There's a person under that pitch black armor, but who? You've got a few candidates, but for something that from my experience produces as much discussion as the three heroes, I never really cared. But why? Well, I already have an answer, but that wouldn't make for an interesting video and I don't want to put a target on my back at the very start, so let's go over what the Knight has done, who they are, the most popular candidates, and why, ultimately, I don't give a shit who the Knight is. In Deltarune's early days, the Knight was less a character and more of a footnote. They were mentioned by a grand total of 3 characters, 4 times by King during his boss fight, only half of which you were guaranteed to see depending on how you handled him, Sham if you inquired about the kingdom, and Jevil if you found and defeated him, which I doubt most of you did on your first run. I didn't. All we could gather was that the Knight influenced the Dark World's leader and was a being that people either heard of but knew little about, or didn't choose to elaborate. This would pretty much remain the same in Chapter 2. Spamton doesn't get to say what's on his mind about the Knight, and anything else apart from the Dark World's leader is just small mentions. However, Queen's fixation allows us to learn how Dark Fountains are made. You think and do the link. But Queen still doesn't know who they are or what they're doing, as we still didn't. Kris making a fountain themselves at the end of the chapter was a red flag given what Rousey told us about the roaring, but it was also a red herring, because the cold place of TV World decided to pull the classic chess move of Knight to C3. Up until this point, if you were to inquire about the Knight's identity, the people who weren't fooled by Chapter 2's ending were most likely to say Papyrus. I think. I don't know for sure. I didn't make it a point to keep up with Deltarune speculation even back then. I was busy getting this channel on its wheels, starting college, writing a novel-length fanfic episode about several game universes facing the apocalypse thanks to Sonic. You know, priorities. I heard a whopping 1 person say a different name, that being Alvin, but we don't talk about that 1 person anymore. Now, with us finally having an official Knight design, one with antlers no less, focus shifted greatly over to the Holiday family. You had people believing it was the missing sister, the overbearing mother, the ill father. Heck, you had some people make theories to justify even Noelle, and those only got stronger recently. And then there was still a group who adamantly believed in Papyrus. As of Chapter 5, nothing's been fully revealed. There is a case to make about the voice on Kris's phone not being Carol and possibly the Knight instead, but if Carol ends up being the Knight, it's a moot point, and we can't use their speech patterns to determine a match given all the spaces. As for the Knight's behavior on-screen, there are multiple things. They like to sometimes alternate between smug and feral beast. Most of their battle starts off as the latter. While they're able to move gracefully when performing slashes with their signature black knife, they're hunched over like they're on strings when called out. Spamton has a buddy now, it seems. They never speak, they indeed roar a couple times, and they have the ability to shapeshift into forms better suited for defense or speed, making you question what the hell they even are. No Lightner has shown such abilities or deformities, and no Darkner, sans Rousey, can exist outside a created world that isn't Castletown, meaning the Knight has to be somewhere in between unless their power in the light world is massively neutered. At the same time, there's a method to their madness. They don't do as much damage to Kris and will only down them as opposed to the swooning they give Susie and Rousey, are seemingly aware of the Shadow Mantle's resistance to their power and will target the bearer most, will pose tauntingly as Susie chases them at the end of the first Sanctuary, and laughs in her face at the third. What's most telling of all are the blatant signs that they aren't pining for world destruction like Susie assumes. They prove capable of one-shotting all 3 heroes when provoked and summoning a world-ending titan in 1 move, but the game's still going, isn't it? They've had plenty of chances to take us out, but never quite go the full distance, and I stand by my theory that the titan summoning was a test. Rousey even says at the start of Chapter 4 that if the Knight just wanted to hurt people, They would have done something more by then instead of just kidnapping Undyne. This makes them all the more intriguing. We don't know their real goal, what their exact leverage over Kris is, their exact reason for kidnapping people, and we can't find out just yet. All we can do is speculate. Just like with their identity. There are various bits that allude to this. Kris seems to know, but they'd rather say they love Sans than admit to it. The only definite clues we have are the 3 shelter codes and what they stand for. A pine tree for the town government, an officer's badge for the police, and the Deltarune for the church. Ironically, the one character that I felt could have access to all 3 based on this is the only character outside of the heroes who tried to stop the Dark Worlds, and he got kidnapped anyway. So let's go over the real candidates and explain, to the best of my knowledge, their evidence and motive for being the knight. But first, let me address the Dawn fan in the room. Papyrus Knight is like Darkside Phil. No matter what you think of it, no matter how much sense it makes to you, it's still around, it's still known, and it's still somewhat popular. In fact, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm pretty sure it was a dominant take back in the Chapter 2 era. At least among people who didn't think the Skeleton Brothers are the exact same between games. These days, it's more of a meme pick, but being brutally honest, the main reason for it is the hope that Papyrus does anything of worth in the story. The legacy characters all have something to do here, whether it's becoming a victim of circumstance, a prominent background role, or even just a moment of nudging you in a certain direction. No character gets as sharp a drop in importance as Papyrus, not even Mettaton, who at least speaks to you from behind a door. And given how he was the main focus of Snowden, had something to say about nearly every room you can enter, was the catalyst for the true pacifist route, and easily one of Undertale's most beloved characters, it's a void that longtime fans want to have fulfilled, regardless of whether or not Kris cares. Of course, brutal honesty moment number 2, Papyrus being the knight would pretty much be purely for fan service. As little as we know about them, a character with 0 screen time or story presence wouldn't make for a very effective reveal. But if I'm somehow wrong and Toby finds a way to make it work, kudos, I guess. Now let's talk about the real candidates, the Holiday family. All 3 of the non-playable members have some sort of baggage that leaves them an option, and thanks to a certain sequence in Chapter 5, there's been a rise of people even saying Noelle is a possibility. I'll go over each character in order of how obvious they'd appear to the average player. That said, we start with Carol, the matriarch, the town mayor, and the first character in all of Toby Fox history that made me immediately think, I hate you. And unlike the other one who made me think that, we don't have enough to make me come around to her yet. Carol's presence has been felt from the beginning, but doesn't make a true on-screen appearance until Chapter 4. Before then, we hear of how she's a highly effective, but completely unendearing mayor with a fixation on the cold, keeping the AC in her office at full blast and the thermostat low in her house. We don't get to hear anything directly from her apart from a letter for Asgore, and that's in hindsight given it's signed with a single initial, and we see it 3 chapters before her on-screen appearance. She's packing a massive katana in the kitchen, and based on the Wet-Nosed Bandit story in Chapter 2, it's clear she knows how to use it beyond cutting fruitcake. When we finally get to see her, having been summoned by Kris through the phone with their mysterious contact who may or may not be her/the knight, she immediately ruins the mood. She's more terse in her speech than Kara, shows nothing but contempt for Susie even though both girls own up to the guitar, and the most hospitable she gets is her tolerance toward the guy she's funding and getting housekeeping from. Apart from Kris, who she's actually pretty welcoming to. You know, after they had just been sabotaging our investigation for a code that she knows is in her missing older daughter's guitar. A code that would help us track down and stop the knight. As much as it can be without outright stating it, it's pretty obvious that Carol is in on the shelter conspiracy. Of course she'd be, she's the mayor. She'd know all about what's going on within her town. But is she merely in on the conspiracy, or is she instigating it? To do so would involve being aware of the prophecy and having a plan with it, but what kind of plan still is yet to be seen. The motivation would be pretty obvious, to find Des, who's been gone for years, whose disappearance has left a strain on both the Holiday and Dreamer families, and is vaguely implied by Asgore to be the result of a Dark World from years ago. At least, that's how it'd seem. But these are when the holes start to show up. If Des going missing was from a Dark World long ago, a Dark World that Asgore's notes reveal was made the same way as Cyberworld, why would Carol be the one to cause it, having already become the problem before doing so, then try to fix it now. And if the Dark World wasn't the cause, okay. There are still some inconsistencies. Exhibit A. We can walk from the holiday house straight to the church, no time in the slightest for Carol to follow us, but when we enter the Dark Sanctuary, the knight's already there. What kind of backdoor manhole warp zone could she take to still get there first? Exhibit B. Personality doesn't line up. The knight is feral, loud on the off chance they verbalize anything, and smug. Carol is painfully straight-laced, terse in both language and movement, and the only times we see her loosen up in any sense are when she shows she has Kris on a leash, and a moment where she may not even be thinking about the plan at all. And let's be real. As suspect as her phone call was at the end of Chapter 4's Weird Route, there's no goddamn way she knew or wanted what happened in Chapter 5. That's a cartoonish level of evil Toby wouldn't write, and couldn't possibly explain. One idea I've seen thrown around is that Carol's a red herring for casual players. The game throws as many tipping points as possible during the holiday house to lead you on while the real identity is kept a secret. And for most people following along from the start, that identity popped out as our next character, Des, short for December. Noelle's older sister, Asriel's ex-girlfriend, and hometown's very own Jimmy Hoffa. Because no one knows where she is. Chapter 1 only has her mentioned offhandedly a couple times by Noelle and her dad. Starting with Chapter 2, it's clear she's a very personal and touchy subject for anyone who knew her. The only one who speaks of her without any sense of hesitance or tact is Tenna, and he only knows what he sees. She's been missing for years, with people either unsure of her whereabouts or refusing to talk about it. The small bits of secondary accounts in her bedroom paint the picture of someone who had a rebellious nature, was protective of her younger sister, has interests one would consider tomboyish like video games, sports, and crude music, was deeply enamored with Asriel, and while she was always the one to smack Kris around for being a gremlin to Noelle, they still seem to look up to her. And if she's the knight, that's evidence piece number 1. Intrepid fans more observant than myself have pointed out the way Kris's body language and mannerisms line up with the knight's, and this would imply a deeper connection than just being co-conspirators for a particular goal. One thing Noelle recounts is that Des promised to take her to a city like the Cyberworld, and the knight was the one to create Cyberworld. Behaviorally speaking, the knight's more pompous moments align closest to what we know about Des more than any of the other holidays. The knight is the one driving the plot forward, like how Des's disappearance kickstarted the conflict that got us to this point and drove the two families apart. Des being the knight would parallel Asriel's situation back in Undertale. Someone who, through circumstances they couldn't control, were turned into the overarching villain of the story while the other is living life away from the conflict. And then there's the matter of the illusions. In my last analysis, I've talked about how blatant Toby is with his inspirations, listing off various references the crystal holders make. The Knight was all about nods to Earthbound. The star attack, swoon dialogue, the black knife being shaped like a baseball bat, which aligns with Des being proficient with a wiffle bat according to Noelle, by the way. But one thing I didn't mention was the parallels to Mother 3. Spoilers for a 2-decade-old game that'll never leave Japan incoming. The main conflict of the game, putting this lightly, is the ensuing takeover of the Nowhere Islands by series antagonist Porky, his pig army, and their commander-in-chief, the Masked Man. Earlier in the game, the family of the main character, Lucas, was shattered in half with the mother dead by an uncharacteristically violent dinosaur, and his twin brother going missing, these losses haunting the remaining family members and those who know them. Doesn't that sound familiar? By the end of the game, Lucas and his team are about to pull the final pendant keeping a dragon asleep that'll remove any traces of Porky's reign, but change the world permanently in the process. Porky at this point is permanently trapped in a ball of cowardice, but the Masked Man, the one who is pulling pendants for him, still stands in their way. An unflinching sentinel tied to both the villain's conspiracy and the protagonist that said protagonist can't bring themselves to properly fight unless all alone, having seen their loved ones wounded. And unlike the Knight, we learn who the Masked Man is right before the battle. It's revealed to be Klaus, Lucas's long-lost twin brother all along. Porky had welded him into a thoughtless puppet since his disappearance, but between standing against Lucas one-on-one and their mother's spirit reminding him of who he is, he regains his senses and atones the only way he can. The only thing we'd need to come full circle is for the Knight to battle Noelle. In fact, the Knight lining up with the Masked Man would even help to solve one big problem with Des being their true identity. motivation. If Des was the Knight, what would her goal in carrying out the prophecy be? Fully conscious, she wouldn't have an apparent reason beyond, say, viewing the Dark Worlds as better and wanting to make the most of them. But then that wouldn't explain the kidnappings, or the Titan, or much of anything. And it'd make her look ridiculous for placing the world at risk just for some fun. Unless she wasn't fully conscious. Des' theory quickly evolved into the idea that the Knight isn't exactly her, but rather patterned after her likeness while the real thing is still lost somewhere no one can find. Enter the Unused, a piece of hidden script in every chapter that details someone trapped in the dark, unable to eat or drink, with no way to make out the time or their surroundings. The only thing that exists to them beyond the dark is occasional scratching. We don't know who this person is, but the most common guess is Des, her consciousness lost within the game's code. There's a precedent for her mind to be the Unused while her body is the Knight. It'd be a similar situation to the Masked Man, Flowey, hell, even the Sound of Justice. But Des doesn't have to be the Knight to also be the Unused, and it ultimately still wouldn't answer the question of what would motivation be. Granted, we don't know anyway, but the Holiday parents have an easy one we can infer. Des doesn't. Speaking of parents, let's talk Rudy now. This is sort of the counterculture pick. For a while, if it wasn't Des, Carol, or the token Papyrus answer, it was Rudy. On the surface, this one is the least likely. We've seen Rudy since Chapter 1 in the hospital, and he's only ever kind to us. His main concern is to make sure Noelle is still doing well, serving as the easygoing fun parent to counterbalance Carol's sternness, but limited in doing so because of his unidentified illness. This is where the suspicions start. Despite the implications that his condition is terminal, we don't know anything about Rudy's illness, and he won't tell us. This gives some credence to the idea that his condition could be linked to the deformities that the Knight shows. They're not exactly the most composed being, after all. Adding on to this, chapters 4 and 5 show that he's able to get out of bed for certain things, for several hours in fact, even though his condition is getting worse as the story progresses, meaning he could feasibly be the one going to create fountains and not be a subject to obvious logic errors like Carol is. Adding on to that, out of the candidates we've discussed so far, he's the most likely to know all the shelter codes. In order to know all three, you'd have to know the mayor, know the cops, and be a frequent churchgoer. With what we know, Carol might not be the last one, and Des might only be the first one. Rudy is the mayor's husband, former police chief Asgore's college roommate and best friend, and we see him at church in Chapter 4. Speaking of Chapter 4, if you visit him in the hospital without having done so in Chapter 2, he's strangely wary of Susie. You know, the person who is most proactive in trying to stop the Knight. Though, this is a bit of an out-of-place moment given how openly he supports Noelle pining for her in the rest of the game, especially in the version of this scene where you did visit him in Chapter 2. That's where more issues begin to creep in. Rudy is a jovial, outgoing fellow who's only ever been encouraging to people he cares for, even convincing Carol to ease up for the festival so Noelle can have the date of her dreams. The Knight is quite the personality shift from that. That's not to say it can't work. We already have a reason for why he'd want to be the Knight, and it would add to the tragedy of him being sick, using all the energy he can to seek out his missing daughter even when it's possible the power he uses to do so is what's killing him. And on that note, problem number 2. Is he even gonna make it? Rudy's Undertale counterpart is long dead, and the last we hear of him in the normal route is Carol calling Noelle to say he fell down. Granted, nothing in Deltarune says that falling down has the same context it does in Undertale, and it could be literal rather than metaphorical. In fact, the weird route sort of implies this is the case, since Rudy is still on the streets at sundown, sitting by the ladder. That is, of course, unless he just has yet to fall. He said he wasn't done. Either way, given how hard he has to exert himself just to go to church, falling down in any context is bad news for him. Even with the recent newsletter implying that we're going to learn the Knight's true identity in Chapter 6, there's a non-zero chance he'll die before it ends. Wouldn't be as effective of a reveal unless it's the rematch that does him in. And then what of finding Des? I can see a timeline where this works. I already explained how, to have him be a tragic villain who means no real malice and uses the last of his life to find the missing piece of his family. but more than a few things have to be convenient for it to go that way without any cracks in the seams. But wait, there's one more holiday, isn't there? Aside from some more obscure, less popular theories, Noelle wasn't really in the running as much for a while. And why would she be? She was a newcomer to Dark Worlds in Chapter 2, still thinks Cyberworld was a dream in the normal route, and she's definitely not the one on the phone in the holiday house. She effectively had an alibi. And then we drowned her. Yes, I'm talking about the up-and-coming starlet that is the Amalgam Theory. That the night is the end result of Kris and Noelle's little bout of something crazy. This stems from the night's similarities to Undertale's Amalgamates, their stunt being seen as a parallel to Asriel absorbing Kara's soul, the shared mannerisms with Kris and Holiday resemblances owing to them being one and the same from different points in time, and the prevalent theory that Deltarune is going to involve a time loop. This theory surmising that the Twisted Sword is the means to get the supposed one ending. I've watched the video that appears to be the theory's origin point, and all the compiled evidence is presented well. Of course, there are some issues that have overall led this theory to become very, very divisive. The main issue here is that this theory is the epitome of bootstrap paradox. A future event, Chapter 5's Weird Route in this case, ends up causing itself due to time travel. Time travel that relies on the rules of saves and resets being the same as Undertale, which we have no way to confirm yet. And on a minor note, like with Death's Knight, this muddies up the Knight's true motivation. While it gives us an explanation of the apparent police sacrifice and Undyne being frozen in ice, as seen in the Shadow Crystal, she wouldn't be the first, what's the end goal? They've already done something crazy, now what? Other people more meticulous than I have written up a laundry list of their own problems with the theory, but that's not my concern. Save that for the next section. So I've gone over every popular candidate, who they are, evidence, possible reasoning, and flaws. It's one of the most important questions about Deltarune's story, so why don't I care? I've never truly had an answer set in stone as to the Knight's identity, but my reason for that has changed over the years. In the demo days, I had two dominant thoughts. Point the first. The annoying dog is the Knight. He was the last one seen in the computer lab before a Dark World was opened there, and he's the stand-in for the reason this game continues. Case closed, no notes, fade to black, watch my funny game reviews. Point the second. Queen says that any Lightner can make a dark fountain with enough will, and Ralsei's sudden mood swing at Bergley's plan to do so indicates this is true before Kris proves it themselves. So I didn't think the Knight was any special as a result. If anyone could make a dark fountain, anyone could be the Knight. And if it's the first person we see to make one on screen? Case closed, no notes, fade to black, watch my funny game reviews. Post Chapter 3, I had a reason to care again now that we actually saw the Knight. For a week. Same deal with Chapter 5. And I'm just gonna put this warning down now. The reason why I always stopped caring about who the Knight was is something rather subjective, doesn't have to do with what the game presents us directly, and it may make you, yes, you, angry. I'm fully expecting pushback for this, so if you want to hold your vitriol, take this sentence and skip to this time. You have 3 seconds. Trying to discuss the Knight is fucking exhausting! We're over halfway through the saga, and the Knight, our one confirmed overarching bad guy, has less screen time than Mother befriending Sans, to the point where plenty of theories use speculation and headcanons as evidence. And you know what? That's fine! No harm in having your own fun with the characters, I do that myself. The problem is that so many people in this fandom get stupidly defensive and combative over their takes to the point where I sometimes think we haven't learned anything from the Needle Cookie days. I know this problem isn't exclusive to Deltarune, let alone to the Knight. More Cruzy fans erupted upon Chapter 5's release than I care to show, but it's with Dark Matter's cousin here that it's the most apparent. People will argue for long chains of replies about them being a fraud, how much sway they have over Kris, and their identity, oh sweet Waluigi, their identity. Make a video talking about why you think one candidate is or isn't the Knight? Cool, more power to you! But when you go on a long, heated tirade because a theory for a fictional story angers you to the point of claiming it's ruining the community? Dude! Go outside! I'm not gonna lie, this post I'm showing here got me to rewrite part of my Kris analysis so that a known theory wasn't catching strays from me. It just gets ridiculous. It sucks the fun out of what even the creator himself considers just as big a part of the Deltarune experience as playing the game, and that, combined with the fact that I know Toby already had everything planned out, is why I rarely bother to speculate on this game's future. Analyzing what we already have can prove just as fruitful, and we're lucky to even have a game that keeps on giving, with a community that keeps on growing, when most other games either don't plan anything, are one and dones with their lore, or they're never going to finish. Bottom line, every theory, whether fun or freaky, grounded or wild, blatant or obtuse, has a place in this fandom. Let people have their fun, and learn to leave someone alone with their ideas if they don't convince you in any way. If you can't find yourself able to do that, and I mean this in the nicest way possible, shut the f*** up! I'm sorry. I don't want to make it seem like I hate talking about this game. I really don't. It just bothers the hell out of me that people stake their emotions so hard to an unhealthy degree over something that doesn't even matter. Didn't Toby's last villain have a line specifically for that? Now, steering the ship back. At the end of the day, nothing's really going to get me to care about the Knight's identity until it's revealed in full. Something Toby implied is going to be the focus of Chapter 6. Whatever it is, I'm sure Toby will find a way to make it work and have me invested. Among the candidates I listed, I can think of something for all of them. Go the masked man route or have Des fully conscious with goals that pose as a dark mirror to Susie's views. Have us defeat Carol and watch her stern front steadily shatter in desperation at trying to get her daughter back. Take a tragic path with Rudy throwing his life away for Des. Lean into the existential horror that the Kris and Noelle amalgam can provide. Give Papyrus literally anything to do. To call Toby a skilled writer is an understatement, even when some things don't land right. He took a character with the most punchable face, demeanor, and leitmotif in the game, and still managed to make him fleshed out, interesting, and likable. I may be indifferent to the current ideas surrounding the Knight beyond kicking their ass in the moment we can, but I still look forward to seeing what Toby's going to do with them. And at the end of the day, that's all I need to be.